Everyone wants about the books I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's a licensed clinical social worker who built a seven-figure group practice while preventing burnout through somatic practice. None other than Miss Helen Malinowski.
Hi, Daniel.
Welcome,
Hi.
welcome, Miss Helen.
Thank you so much for having me on. I have to say, I've really been looking forward to this conversation. I really love how you dig beneath the surface with your questions. So if you're listening, for all of the listeners out there, if this conversation resonated with you, then I would say please go give Daniel a 5-star rating because that's how more of us get to find you. So
Yes,
thank you
please
for having
do
me
so.
on.
You're most welcome, Miss Helen, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to thank you. And today, let's talk about something good, isn't it? A topic
Hmm.
that everybody wants to know to prevent burnout.
We do.
It's
We do.
interesting. So, tell us, Miss Helen, the topic implies that you have been both side burnout and thriving at a seven figures. Can you take us back to the moment you realized the traditional model of a clinical practice was slowly destroying you?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I just want to start by saying that my experience, I think, is not unlike many others, that our own awareness of where we're at is often not where our awareness of other people is at. So I started this journey in hindsight, looking back to when I was in a role of a clinical director in an addiction treatment center. And I abruptly left that role when I was pregnant with my second son. At the time, not identifying that burnout was the problem. And yet I was exhausted. I was having terrible morning sickness. And it just, there was a part of me that just said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. And I jumped into private practice and I loved that. And I was thriving and seeing lots of clients and very much at some level enjoying what I was doing. And COVID happened. And so this was about 2 years later. COVID came along, and like many of us, our worlds were flipped upside down. And I found myself going from sitting in rooms with clients 25, 30 hours a week to being online with clients and to getting calls and emails and many people asking for help and for my time. And I found that I was increasingly struggling to say no, and I was squeezing appointments into nap times because my kids were now home and later in the evenings. And 6, 7, 8 months in, I can't remember the exact timeline, I went to my primary care physician for an annual physical, and I was sitting in the office, and he was asking me a series of probably pretty standard questions that were, mental health related. And we had a good working relationship. I've known him for some time. We refer people back and forth. He's asking me things like, how has my mood been? How has my sleep been? And as I don't think anyone had asked me these questions for quite some time. And so I'm answering and I'm realizing, boy, I'm more irritable than is my normal go-to. And I'm not sleeping well and I'm tired. And he turned to me and he said, Helen, he said, you know, it's COVID. We know what's happening in the healthcare industry. We know what's happening with providers and doctors and nurses. And he goes, you're burnt out. And I looked at him. I remember looking at him and thinking, that's crazy. I'm not burnt out. This is just part of the job. And so that was my wake up call, that I was doing something I didn't know. Like many of us, I didn't know that what I was doing wasn't working for me, and I didn't know that what I was experiencing was burnout. But this was the wake up call, and I had to look at what I was doing and how I was working and how I was practicing in a very, very different way. And so, yeah, that was the beginning of my realization that I had to change how I built my practice and I had to change how I was working. And so that was the beginning of the growth of what I currently have as my group practice, which is now a 7-figure business. It was the very, very beginning baby steps of me recognizing that I needed to grow something in a way that felt authentic to my nervous system, that was within my capacity to hold and to build. And that was only 5 years ago. So we've come a long way in the last 5 years.
Congratulations, Miss Helen. You did it. You
I
did
did.
it. For clinicians, burnout is often framed as a personal failing. You didn't practice enough self care. What was the structural reality of your burnout and had nothing to do with the bubble bath and boundaries?
That is such a great question. What did I do differently? I think that there's a false choice that many of us face when we're thinking about our businesses. We've grown up in a world where that basically has said how hard you work is equivalent to your worth or your value, and your success is going to be contingent on how hard you work. And I think that that's ultimately a false choice. I think that finding ways to be connected with your inner self, finding ways to look inwards and assess what is your body telling you, what is your nervous system telling you, will give you the information that you need to make decisions that will allow you to grow your business, but will allow you to grow it in a way that is in alignment with what your actual capacity for growth is. And not just growth. I mean, I'm saying growth, but also what is your capacity for being present in marketing your business? What is your capacity for building? How does building a team around you support you having more capacity versus less capacity? Who are you bringing on? And I don't think that we're taught that. So I don't think that my experience is that we're not taught that. We're not taught it in graduate school. And many of us are not taught it in life. It's something that we sort of stumble across, or we're lucky enough to encounter a mentor. But we don't know what we don't know until we know it. And I've been building a program at the Somatic Integration Institute that is designed specifically to support clinicians who are starting to realize that something's off, that something's not fitting right, and that what they want and what they're striving towards has been straining them in a way that isn't sustainable.
Very well said, Miss Helen. Very well said indeed. So, well, were there specific patients, or specific Tuesday, or specific bill you cannot pay that made you say something has to fundamentally change?
It's so interesting you say this. I was actually having a conversation with a client relatively recently about their own journey in therapy and their own experience with clinicians. And this is someone that I've worked with for a number of years. And for those of you listening, this may resonate with you, that you've encountered a client who comes to you, and they come to you with their own experience of therapy. I mean, I hope many of you haven't experienced this, but they come to you with their own experience of a negative experience of therapy with a previous clinician. And when you're sitting in a room with them, when you're engaging kind of in that therapeutic process, you realize that that other clinician is still present, that there's sort of the ghost of Christmas past, as it were. And with this particular client, their previous clinician had experienced what we've sort of come to understand in our conversations over the last several years as a pretty significant burnout episode that resulted in a very abrupt termination of therapy that has significantly affected this person that I've been working with on, and so our work has really been about reestablishing trust, safety in relationships. And it didn't need to happen that way. And so this is actually a client whose experience with a previous therapist deeply informed how I have seen the necessity of supporting clinicians and finding ways for clinicians to understand when burnout is happening to them and strategies to navigating it and to managing it. It was something that pushed me in the direction of somatic therapy. I began my training as a somatic experiencing practitioner in uh, 2019, 2020. Right, it was right about all the same time of my own experience with burnout, and as I was in it, like thinking I'm going to learn strategies for working with my clients, I realized that this is in some ways it's the secret sauce that we as therapists need, that we need to learn how to tune into our own bodies and our own nervous system and our own we need to be able to look inwards, right? To like check out that mirror and have it reflect back to us what it is that we need to know rather than having the external world inform our decisions in a way that feels very much outside of our control. So this is interesting. This is a client that I've been working with for a while, and in a lot of ways they were the inspiration for what I've been building.
Interesting and empowering story, Miss Helen. You are a healer by training, right? So,
Mhm.
how did your own identity as a helper make it harder to admit you were the one who need help?
That is a great question. I'm a healer by training. I would say listeners out there, if you're a therapist and you're listening and you say, "Yeah, I'm a healer by training," you might also say, I'm I was a healer before I was trained. And this might sound familiar, right? That you're listening and you're thinking, "Oh, I before I ever even became a therapist, I was the one that my friends came and talked to. I was the one that carried the emotional burden, the emotional weight in my family of making sure that things felt balanced and safe." And as therapists, we're called to this field, we're called to this practice, and we often realize that those traits that drew us here are traits that also carry a weight. And if we don't learn how to pay attention to them and how to work with them, they continue to follow us. They continue to show up in our in our lives. And in a lot of ways, it's the thing I think that's really the hardest part about this work. When you're a person who's not naturally maybe empathic or naturally a helper, you are going to sit with people all day long. You know, those of you who, you might be listening, you might think, yeah, I sit with people all day long. And at the end of the day, you come home and you realize that you're tired, you're irritable, you're not feeling yourself. You walk in the house, you sit down on the couch, you want to just have a moment of peace and quiet. And if you're like me and you have a family, maybe you don't get that moment of peace and quiet. Maybe there always feels like there's a little bit more that's needed of you or wanted of you. And you find yourself feeling irritated, dare I say, maybe even resentful, and then guilty, and maybe even ashamed for having some of those feelings. And so this is not uncommon in this field to be navigating a calling to something that hasn't actually trained you in how to navigate that inner world of feeling deeply and wanting to be present, and yet also realizing that you have a limit to your capacity, and it becomes hard to honor that limit without the support, without community. Mm.
Empowering indeed, Miss Helen. And most clinicians are trained to be excellent providers, but terrible business owners. What was the hardest mindset shift you had to make? Stop seeing yourself as a therapist with a side hustle and start seeing yourself as a CEO of a practice?
I love that question. That's
Thank
a
you.
wild question, right? That is a wild question. What is the hardest part about going from being a therapist to a business owner? I've been having conversations this week where I've been recognizing that I have for a long time had a foot in both worlds, And there's been periods over the years where I've been like, oh, I still have my foot in this other world, and it's detracting from my ability to focus on this. And so it's interesting to reflect on that. Well, what makes that switch happen? What is my identity as a leader? What is my identity as a therapist? How do they intertwine with one another? Business owners, clinicians who own group practices, who find themselves struggling with managing the time that it takes to figure out the billing or contact insurance companies or follow up with intake referrals. And they're also struggling with maybe saying no to taking on new clients, or feeling a sense of responsibility towards the clients that they currently have. I think that there's this balance that we struggle with, that we're not taught how to navigate, and that's really, really, really hard to navigate when you're in it by yourself. It's almost impossible to look inwards and say that this is my struggle and not have a support system to lean on. I think that finding a community, finding a group of, and they don't even have to be other clinicians, but in an ideal world, they are other clinicians, finding a group where you can talk about these struggles and explore what's working for other people, and lean into maybe trying something new and shifting how you operate, learning how to let go, I think is a big piece of this, and trusting that at some level, when you let go of a particular role or you pass it along to somebody else, that other person probably is going to do it better than you, because you are not, born to be a biller. You were not born to be an administrative assistant. We need those people as business owners and as clinicians. And at some level, I think we're taught, and if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh yeah, I do all of that stuff. I do my billing, I do my intake calls, I answer all of my emails. At some level, if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, I have to do all of that, and I think we're taught that we have to do all of that, until someone tells you that you don't, that you have to learn what it is that you're really good at, and you have to lean into what it is that you're really good at, and understand that there's things about this job that you are not going to like and that you're not going to be good at, and that's okay. It's okay to let go of pieces of the business and pass them along to somebody else who's just going to be exceptional at it. I think that that's the shift that it takes from being a clinician and just a sole clinician to being a business owner, that understanding that there is this whole world of responsibility, and you don't have to hold it all yourself. You just have to guide it. You have to lead it. You have to be at the head of the table.
Definitely, you need to be the head of the table, as Miss Helen right now. So, what will be your short-term and long-term goals as a CEO, as a founder, Miss Helen?
Ooh, short-term and long-term goals. My short-term goals are, generally speaking, making sure that we have stable revenue streams, that we have maybe some diversification of revenue. My current practice is insurance-based, and so we're sort of at the whim sometimes of what's happening in the insurance world. So a short-term goal is figuring out some strategies for my group practice to stabilize my revenue. For my practice, long-term goals are allowing the practice to, it's really stepping aside from any of the day-to-day work, and really being in the bigger picture of it. I will also say that on a short-term basis, I'm really focused on building community and clinicians. I've been working on an advocacy project in Massachusetts that's been very interesting. And I've been connecting with clinicians who have been struggling with burnout and bringing them into a community that I have that has been growing to support their business goals and support them in a way that is It's the best word that I want to look for, in a way that is sustainable, that allows their practices to feel as though they have a really strong foundation, but that they're not straining themselves on an individual basis. So those are some of my goals. Daniel, I have a lot of goals. I have a million things that I'm interested in. That's a really hard question for me to answer.
No worries at all, Miss Helen. Good luck to your goals and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there want to be like you?
Ooh, if you're listening to this and any of my story sounds familiar, um, my piece of advice would, well, obviously, my piece of advice would be reach out to me. I want to connect with you. I want to talk to you. Another piece of advice I would say is don't be afraid of slowing down. Sometimes we think that the harder we work, the more we're going to succeed, but it's okay to take a break. It's okay to slow down and rest.
Mm, definitely. And thank you for that, Miss Helen. Inspiring advice. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Sure. So I'm a therapist, and I'm constantly a lot of. I would like to say that more of my books are business related, but the books that really draw me are clinical. I came across this book by Babette Rothschild last year, maybe, and it's called Help for the Helper: Self Care Strategies for Managing Burnout and Stress. Right
Highly
here. Self
recommended.
I do, because it really looks at the as she writes on the cover, the psychophysiology of compassion fatigue. One of the things that we deal with often in this industry is, and not just burnout at a business level, but is the reality that we're hearing intense stories as clinicians all the time, and sometimes that catches up to us and it sticks in our body in a way that we have a hard time letting go of. So it's a phenomenal book to work to address some of the some of the weight that we carry around as clinicians, and how do we support ourselves so that we don't break under the stress of our jobs.
Well, thank you for that recommended book, Miss Helen. So, what is the biggest myth about wealthy therapists that you wish would disappear? What do people get wrong about clinicians who would real financial freedom?
Oh, I think that the myth is that they're selfish,
Mm,
and that they are prioritizing their own financial gain over the needs of the clients that are out there needing their help. I think that that's an unfair accusation that a lot of therapists struggle with when they're trying to make the decisions around around the financial future of their practices, or their own financial futures. I remember, and I know this is probably supposed to be a shorter question, but I remember early on when I was growing my business, someone who was working with me, who had been there from the beginning. I overheard them talking with another one of my clinicians in just like through the door. They were talking too loudly, and essentially they sort of had this assumption that because I was the business owner, I was, quote unquote, rolling in the dough. And I think that there is this belief and this assumption out there that group practice owners are maybe greedy, or making a ton of money, and they're not like sharing the wealth with the other clinicians. And I think that that's something that it's an unfair assumption, because the group practice owners, and if you're listening and you're a group practice owner, you're going to completely understand what I'm saying. We're carrying a weight of an enormous responsibility for our clinicians, for our clients, financially, for the business. And it's not something that's easy to understand until you're actually in that role. So I think it all has to do with money. It all comes back down to assumptions about money and myths about money.
ah, it's all about money, people. You should have a mindset money, money, come to me. Just like
Money,
Miss
money, come to
Helen.
me.
Yeah, just like Miss Helen did. So before we wrap up our discussion, Miss Helen, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my Abstract Essay is already in sixth season, Abstract Poetry in third season, and of course my book 101 review in sixth season too, Comedy 101 in fourth season, and Food 101 in sixth season as well, Geography 101 Love Letters, Movie 101 Review, Music 101 our fifth season, Science 101 Sex 101 in third season. And of course, my baby podcast, Trivia 101, Spiritual Awakening 101, Entrepreneurship 101, Law 101, Mental Health 101, and the newest one, Coaching 101, as well as my Bible Verses 101. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Helen, when you look back at the burnout version of yourself, what would you want to tell her about what was waiting on the other side if you just had the courage to build something different?
I love that question. What would I tell her about what's waiting on the other side? I would tell her that she doesn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders, that
Yes.
it's not as hard as you're making it out to be. And it's okay to lean into community and to lean on people around you. You don't have to do this all alone.
Certainly. If you need help, please ask for help, people. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Miss Helen, thank you,
Mhm.
thank you, thank you. So can you please invite our listeners to support your business, your advocacy, or whatever projects that
Yeah.
you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I actually have a special offer for listeners today, and don't share this because this is actually something that is has a lot of value and is a critical part of the Catalyst Collective, which is the community that I'm offering. But it is, if you go to somaticintegrationinstitute.com/book, you are going to find a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of resources. I have a burnout assessment that will tell you exactly where you're at. I have a practice energy audit that will help you take a really in-depth look at where you're losing time and energy in your practice. And I have access, and this is like the very exclusive thing, to the Flourishing Practice System, which is a series of talks with me basically about how do you build a practice that is sustainable, that's going to flourish, and that's going to fulfill you at the end of the day. So somaticintegrationinstitute.com/book, go there, download it, get all that information. It's going to make you feel better at the end of the day about how you're working. Find me on Somatic Informed Therapies on Instagram and reach out. You'll find me. I know we're sharing the website, but reach out, shoot me an email. I'd love to connect.
Yes, people, let's connect with Miss Helen because, as we said, money will come to you
Mhm.
for sure. So, Miss Helen, I have one more question. If you had to distill the entire journey from burnout to seven figures into three non-negotiable principles, what would they be?
Hmm. Oh my goodness, that is a tough one. Three non negotiable principles: community, know your values, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Indeed, Miss Helen. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon.